Okay, in this video I want to give you a overview of how each of the segments of your work thus far is leading up to your final work. And so it's going to show you hopefully how you started getting introduced to both the concept of legalese and then green criminology, which many of you said was new. And then also you start to see how resistance, social control, and movements are operating within the law and criminal justice systems in ways that defied many of your assumptions and expectations of kind of the good guy catching the bad guy, right? Now, hopefully you're seeing it's much more complicated than that. So you need to be able to show how the problems are complicated and how the solutions are complicated. You started out, many of you, with a Google document, and so let me explain why, right? The basic level is that it's a good habit to get into if you haven't been taught how to outline a course and how to synthesize concepts yet. What we mean here is taking the most important elements and starting to identify those in the readings and in the conversations and the activities that you do in a class, and then seeing what's important for you to use as you start to make sense of the content. A Google Doc is also a lot easier for me to comment and communicate with you, so you can see on the right-hand side here that I'm able to talk to this student, highlighting specific things that they're looking at and say, maybe you can focus on this, maybe you're missing this, here's a link that helps you think more about it. So it's a very effective way to kind of keep track of everything, but not having to write over and over and over again. It also shows me your progress, right? So some of you, I haven't heard from you in weeks. I have no idea whether you're doing well, whether you're struggling, right? What a Google Doc does is I get to see this is what you did during that week. Maybe you missed something and then you catch up later, right? The downside, of course, is that this might be too new for some of you. You might not be used to outlining. You may have never done outlining before. You might not be used to taking notes. I know that might be a reality now because of COVID learning. And just using Google Docs might be too difficult or new to you. So this was kind of an introduction, right? A start. The next thing is more typical. So for those of you who might have struggled with the Google Docs, maybe writing an essay is easier because you have to do that in other classes and you had to do that in high school. So this is a more typical type of assignment. It gets you started with the research. You probably feel pretty good, or maybe not, right? Some people feel differently, but you might feel good after writing a paper, right? Because you feel like you accomplished something, and that's certainly true. But what it hopefully shows you in a draft is that you're just getting started with the research, right? You can't do everything. I'd say 99% of you tried to do way too much in your papers. And so this helps you start to think about that, which things are important to you. Many of you really struggle to apply class concepts. In fact, I didn't see very many application of class concepts in your draft essays. The good news for you is that's really common. The bad news is now you have to think, right? You have to go back to your notes or to your readings, and this is where if you didn't have the Google Docs, then guess what? You're gonna have to go back through the readings again because you didn't take notes on them. You're gonna have to go back through the activities again because you didn't take notes on them. You have to now reorganize them again because you don't have the Google Docs. Keeping organized is one way of making life easier for yourself. However, even if this is a typical assignment, some of you might struggle with this. Maybe you're not the strongest writer. Maybe you're still learning to write. Maybe you haven't been able to do very good research. Maybe you had too much going on. Maybe it was a bad time for you, right? So it might be too formal for some of you. Quote unquote cheating is hard to avoid, right? It's hard to, citations are difficult. Learning how to do citations properly is a challenge. I kind of joke, but I'm serious that, if you're struggling with citations, just put the hyperlink in, right? If I can find the source of your information, that's good. It's better than not putting that information in and, running your essay through a scan and finding out that you plagiarized it, or worse, that a machine generated the content. Those two things are also pretty easy to see, even though I don't really focus on them in this class as much because I'm focused on how you apply class concepts, something that machines can't do and something that you can't copy and paste on the internet. So it's hard for you to do this assignment if you aren't organized. Also, you should be visiting the Writing Center online. Here's the link here. You could also search on Google KLC Kingsborough. But a best practice, or the students who do the best in college will have visited the Writing Center to help them work on formal assignments like an essay. I've also given you opportunities in the discussion board to show your learning, and so I'm going to do that here again. You're going to have one where you can update me in a less formal way. It's similar to what you've been doing each week, and so this might be easier for you. You can also see other students in the process. You can see how they're doing. What are they struggling with? What things are they doing well? You can comment on projects. Say, I like what you're doing. This is similar to what I'm doing. Have you seen this? You can help each other with citations, with resources. And I can reply to your post there, so it gives us the added element of communication. So that's another way that we're working towards the final work. Now, then we have the actual final product, the thing that is going to be half of your final grade. So one part of this is the project proposal. We're going to reduce it down to one page. So this now requires you to take all that complicated stuff that you've been doing and narrow it down to the most important points. It shows me whether you're able to apply learning. It also shows you, right? If you look at the document and you can't figure out how to take the course concepts or the theories and put them into your one page, then it's evidence you didn't learn those theories or concepts in the class. If you are able to do it, then we can see how well you're able to do it. The main point here is that you have to try to do it. Try to take all that information and now reduce it into one page. It can be similar to a PowerPoint slide. You can make a PowerPoint slide and convert that to a PDF and share that. You can draw it in physical reality with markers and paper, like the example you see here. You can be flexible. You can use technology if you want. There's a bunch of programs that can help you make one document, and it's really useful for me to see whether you've really learned, and it should be useful for you to see what have you learned. Now with that is going to be a final essay, so this is a second chance for you to use the concept theories and to synthesize what you learned in the class. If you're not saying green criminology, if you're not talking about integrative learning, if you're not talking about the civil legal system, if you're not talking about crime, if you're not talking about social movements, right? If you're not talking about any of the things that we talked about in class, then you're not doing very well on the final essay. You also need to narrow down the problem in your community, and you need to define your community. However you define that is up to you, but you need to provide some definition of it. What is the problem? Where is it? And who are the people that are affected? You want to be able to talk about the limits and constraints of the court system. This should come from your research, right? You'll probably have some ideas about the limits and constraints of the court system as it relates to your community problem. But you should also do research to find out what have other people said about it. And then you should be learning, you should be showing me that you've learned new vocabulary, right? That's why I've told you in the readings to memorize the definitions, to start applying them, to start using them. You should also think about essay writing a little bit more concretely, right? Less about getting started and less about starting the research and getting your ideas on paper, to really thinking about how I can become a better writer and write college level papers. And so the resource that was recommended to me over 20 years ago was owl.purdue.edu. That's owl.purdue.edu. And it's still the one that people recommend. It's got lots of resources and lots of ways of thinking about how to structure your paper in particular. It also includes how to do APA formatting and citations. Again, though, it's even better if you can visit the Writing Center either virtually or in person. Now, this is probably overwhelming, but I wanted to just give you an example of a one-page document that shows you all of the elements that you've been learning. And these are the major elements, so you can feel free to include other things that you've researched or included on your discussion boards. But I just wanted to give you an idea, right, that starting over on this left-hand corner, those are the instructions for the actual assignment, right, what you've been asked to do. You're supposed to choose a criminal justice problem in your community. You should define your community, name who the people are, or at least describe them. define integrative learning that was provided to you in a reading, apply the definitions, theories, and processes that you've learned in the readings to the criminal justice problem in your community that you've picked, and then discuss the limits and constraints of both the criminal justice system, the criminal courts, cops, corrections, and surveillance, as well as the legal systems, meaning the ideas that people have about law, the civil law system, lawsuits, and other things that you might want to include, including international laws, the lack of law, right? Some of you have commented on that. Why isn't there a law for this and this, right? So those are all things that you want to include. And then after you've kind of included that, you want to then synthesize. And what we mean by synthesis is you take the main elements from green criminology, crimmigration, civic engagement, and social movements. I've given you analytical essays at the end of each of those units as examples of how to do that. So feel free to copy those examples, cite to me, and use that as your way of synthesizing, meaning bringing those things together into a coherent argument. You want to focus on the three elements of green criminology. That's the relationship among environment, animals, and humans, all one thing. A focus on crime, a focus on harm, those two things together, so crime and harm, and then a focus on injustice, right? So those are the three elements of green criminology that you want to make sure that you've definitely talked about. Now moving to the right, I've just kind of shown you, if you go back to the readings, and I'm kind of doing this on purpose, you can remove the highlights in the annotations with the remove button, which looks like a little eyeball in the upper right hand corner. But I wanted to keep them on here so you could see most of you focused in on the right things, right? So the highlights are a good example of the things you should be talking about. And so you see here the elements of green criminology, what is methodology, what is method, how you do it, how you start thinking about combining your notes and how to think about the readings, examples of what crimmigration is, examples of what social movements are, defining and understanding or explaining what we mean when we say intersectionality or intersectional harm and how that relates to injustice. Then if you move to the far right, again in the readings, the highlighted, you'll see here are case studies that we've given you about social movements that are trying to work up against sometimes the legal system, but also through the legal system. And that's the Wild Tomorrow Fund, Grown in Haiti, Phoenix Community Garden, Alpha Arts Alliance. And then there's an idea here that Collins gives you about what a community is and how you can start thinking about that as applies to your community criminal justice problem. You should think about what communities Wild Tomorrow Fund is working with. What communities is Grown in Haiti working with? The Phoenix Community Garden, who are they working with? Alpha Arts Alliance is interesting, right? Because it's Brooklyn based, but it's trying to work with artists all over the world. And so there's a really interesting local, global thing going on there that makes defining community very difficult. Finally, I wanted to pull out some of the things that came from the discussion board, right? And I think it would be useful to use the graph. There's two kind of graphs or tables that were provided in your readings. One that gave you the steps of green criminology as it applied to poaching. This other one was examples of disintegrated subjects that come from the legal system, criminal justice system, and immigration, so crimmigration. And so what happens to people through the criminal justice program and how that changes who they are or how they're seen as human beings. If you took those ideas and applied them to the concepts below that you've been talking about in discussion, that would be a really good way of synthesizing information. Now, obviously, it would be great if you could do all of the concepts, but go ahead and start with 3, right? Start with 3 concepts that you think you feel good about and start with that and start building your way up. You've been doing this, whether you realized it or not, in the discussion board posts. So that's why I encouraged you earlier to go back and collect your discussion board posts and look at the patterns, what's standing out as being similar, and what might you want to do differently in your final action research project proposal and your essay. So these are just ways that all of these pieces can connect together. How you organize them is really up to you and your unique criminal justice problem in your unique community. Finally, I just wanted to think about 2 other ideas. One being, I've been using a points-based system in classes for quite a long time because students insist that they want that. And I want to just, fine, right? It's not a big deal. I don't mind using that if students think that's helpful for them to be motivated to complete coursework. However, what we're doing on the other end, faculty, the institution, the government, right? How we think about learning is not based on how many points you have. It's based on whether you're able to actually accomplish these things that we've set out as outcomes. So there are learning outcomes that have been set up in the units, and those correlate or they connect to the units here. And I just wanted to kind of pull out some student responses that show how you move through this process, right? So students will kind of start in this class about injustice as a very abstract general idea. They won't be very specific. You won't have any particulars of what happened. You might tell it like you see it on a TV show, right, as a story that's a good guy, bad guy, and then there's a happy ending. You'll start to maybe think about blaming big things that are hard to define, like society or bad people, right, things that are impossible to actually point at and solve. And you might be focusing only on yourself. You might be talking about things based on things that you find in your social media or the internet, and you might think that there's not really much that can be done. Over time, you should be able to start to not only complain about a problem or identify an injustice, but also to see that there are organizations that have been successful in dealing with that problem or injustice, but also limitations to what they've been able to accomplish. You should start to see how criminal justice and legal systems don't always help, that they oftentimes get in the way of people who are trying to solve a problem or an injustice. And then you should be able to start doing that by connecting it to other classes you've taken and to your major of criminal justice. Partially what you're doing in this class is something that you're required to do according to the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, but also as part of the Justice Academy, the relationship we have with John Jay, that these are things that you're supposed to be able to do this research and apply it to your discipline, as well as at Kingsborough to civic engagement. And so you should start to show me that you're capable of doing that. In a perfect world, right, ideally you'd either volunteer for one of the organizations that we've partnered with, or you'd provide some help to them in some other way. Maybe you make an Instagram post that promotes what they're doing. Maybe you connect a friend who really loves art and they'd really like to be represented by Alpha Arts Alliance. Maybe somebody's really interested in doing work in South Africa, and so they decide that they're going to commit to making that a plan in the next 3 years, that they're going to work with Wild Tomorrow Fund. Ideally, that you do that because you're connecting two things: your interests, the things that are important to you, especially as they relate to problems in your community, but also the learning that's being offered to you in this class and the resources that are available at Kingsborough. And so you'd kind of be moving towards that. And then finally, you'd be able to look back at the end of your, as you're transitioning out of Kingsborough, you'd say, look, I see how all these pieces fit together. And you'd be able to explain that. You'd be able to tell people how this was integrative for your experience. And hopefully you'll be thinking, and I had to define integrative education or integrative learning, and so now I see how it applies. So how do you do that? Well, one theory that my colleague Helen and I have is, according to the social science research, people need to be able to see their identity matching up with their agency, which is the ability to make change with other people, and they have to make a decision to be an advocate or not be an advocate and explain to the group why they don't want to do it or why they think it's a bad idea. So what you're seeing here is that your standpoint comes from your relationship to concerns you have, to issues that you think are important, to problems in your community, to how you define your community, and to how you see yourself as a criminal justice student moving through this process. Agency is then using those identities and those resources as a way to move towards your goals, things that you want to see accomplished, but also doing that for the greater good, for your community. And then finally, making that choice to be an advocate really comes down to whether you think there's a benefit in it for you and your community, but also whether you've got access to the resources and knowledge necessary to be an advocate. And so we've been asked to think about it in these 4 ways, is to really connect the readings and the assignments to, the very complex plural competition for power in New York City and our political systems. And to really explain what you saw in the readings that help you better understand that there's not one system, right? That there's lots of different people competing for power and that not everybody is equal. How that then helped you also think about criminal justice and law and what you think civic engagement could be if you had access to resources and more information, or if you decided to be an advocate. And then what about this information is useful to improve your community? You could also think about how it's useful to the case studies that we provided. Is it useful for the Phoenix Community Garden? Is it useful for people who are organizing around art, right? What could they do to benefit? You could have solutions there as well. And then something my colleague Helen and I thought is important is to let you have some ideas. What changes would you make to the 3 questions above? How would you try to think about making a better connection or a more useful connection between social community challenges and what we're calling and using as civic engagement in Kingsborough Community College as part of your graduation requirement? So I wanted to give you this overview so that you had a sense of what it is that you're being asked to do, how there's not one right way to do it, and how the course has been broken down into pieces so that you could work on a little bit at a time and build your way up. And so you have a better sense of, if you haven't done that, how to do that now, because you still have over a month to complete this task. And so I did want to make sure that I gave you enough time that even if you fell behind, you'd be able to catch back up. So I hope that this provides that kind of an overview. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please email me and we'll set up either way to help you online or we'll try to meet on Zoom.